FM News Talk 97.1. On-demand audio.
Support growing gun control are not getting very far as banning assault-type weapons. Have you basically given up on that part of gun control?
Absolutely not, Wolf. Every element of the legislative package that the president put forward and that he supports in Congress is something that he wants to see voted on and passed by Congress.
Oh, boy. You know what? Democrats, it's a two-pronged thing here. They really want something like this to pass. They're going to tempt the fates. Remember what happened in 1994. It didn't actually reduce crime. In fact, crime didn't start reducing until after the assault weapons ban expired, and then we saw a 17% drop, according to FBI uniform crime reports, from, 2004 to 2011. Yeah. The other part of this is, though, that Democrats are really looking to reposition this as though Republicans are the ones that are blocking any reform. They're trying to inflate this perspective that the American public wants this, and at the same time give cover to those Democrats in purple states, people like Mary Landrieu, who's been trying to position herself as a moderate, and others who could really be hurt badly going into midterms if they came out anywhere on this. And as they're having this national conversation, remember, always watch the other hand when they're waving at you with, if they're waving at you with their right hand, always watch their left hand, because they're doing this in the state by state as well. We first brought you the story of that Stoddard County, Missouri resident who filed a criminal complaint when he realized the Department of Revenue was actually sharing his information when he went to go renew his concealed carry, sharing his information with third-party agencies against Missouri law, which prohibits us from fully complying with the Real ID Act. And then this story broke open, and some unbelievable stuff came out, including how we see Department of Homeland Security grant money being used to create a database of Missouri residents and track absolutely everything, all against Missouri law. Missouri State Senator Kurt Schaefer has been on the forefront of this, and in a hearing today, really took the Department of Revenue to task. Senator Schaefer, first off, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining me. And secondly, tell us what happened this afternoon. I've heard a lot.
Well, good afternoon, Dana. Well, as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, we're responsible for being stewards of the public's money and deciding what agencies get public money for governmental functions. And so as part of that process, we're at the stage right now in the Senate where we're drafting that budget, and we're on House Bill 4, which is where the Department of Revenue's budget is located. And so going through that process this morning, we brought in the Department of Revenue to go through some of these things to make a determination of still what is it exactly that they're doing and how are they spending the public's money to do that, and how can we stop that? And so we had a hearing this morning, very insightful. And what was interesting from the last time I talked to Revenue, and I think, as you know, I had asked them about 3 weeks ago for their compliance package with Real ID that Homeland Security's website says Missouri submitted to Janet Napolitano back in December. They didn't give that to me, which precipitated me issuing a subpoena. And that's the first time we've issued a Senate subpoena in decades. But we got about 50 bankers' boxes of documents, but we're still going through those. We did find, though, that letter. It's a December 12, 2012 letter from then Revenue Director Alana Berrigan-Scott to Janet Napolitano at Homeland Security, basically saying, okay, here is our list of how we're complying with Real ID. And it's what it is. I mean, the Department of Revenue calls it their Real ID Act of 2005 benchmark checklist. And I've got the checklist, and it's got all those things, including what we spent a lot of time on today, which is compliance with the federal rule under Real ID at 6 CFR 37.33, that's that database. That database that Revenue never kept before until they started in December when they changed over this process in compliance with Real ID to scan all your personal documents and for the first time ever retain them, and then put everything about you in there, including the fact if you have a concealed carry or not. And so we had a lot of discussion about that. And it was interesting because they still insist that they're not complying with Real ID, yet they met the deadline in December to compliance package. And in that package, they included their benchmark checklist for Real ID to say what they're doing to implement it. So it's interesting. The only thing they say they're not doing is there's actually a requirement of Real ID that the state compliant driver's licenses have a watermark or some mark on them that say Real ID compliant. And they say they're not doing that because Missouri law prohibits them from doing that, but not all these other substantive elements of carrying out Real ID. What I would say to that is, that's the equivalent of a guilty plea. Because if they put the watermark on there and say they're compliant with Real ID, then they can't play this game of semantics, which is we're doing all of the things required. We're just saying that's not what it is.
Yeah, and basically it's breaking the law.
Well, it is. And then the other thing that came out today, and we knew this from the documents we got, Division of Motor Vehicles at Department of Revenue applied specifically to Homeland Security for Homeland Security grants to implement Real ID. And they submitted that application saying that that was the purpose of the money. They knew that, and they were taking the money for that purpose, and that's, in fact, apparently what they used the money for.
Wow.
So, again, it's this game of semantics. But, the example I like to use, if I jump out of an alley and knock you down and take your wallet and run off, and somebody says, you just committed a burglary, and I say, no, I didn't. I just knocked you down and took your wallet and ran off. Well, of course I committed a burglary. It doesn't matter if I admit to calling it a burglary or not, and that's really where we are in this process.
Wow. And this is, where is Governor Nixon in all of this? Because I was reading, he gave a statement to the press a couple of weeks ago saying that, he knows that Missouri's not really supposed to, to boil it down, he knows Missouri's not supposed to comply fully with the Real ID Act. He just doesn't know what's happening and kind of washed his hands of the matter, which you can't have it both ways.
I think the really interesting thing about that is I think the governor's statement was that the Department of Revenue is not keeping people's documents and they don't have some new magical database.
Right.
And I think the interesting thing about that is that section, it's actually number 36 on the compliance checklist. That's section 37.33 of the rule for Real ID, where they keep your documents. This is a requirement they say they're doing, keeping the documents and putting them in that new database. And their statement on that is they're not yet fully compliant, but they will be by May of 2013. And that's because they haven't switched over all the fee officers yet.
Wow. Just so where do we go from this point? Because I know that their budget has now been stripped. That's what, $3.4 million?
Right. That's just in the Department of Motor Vehicles, but there's quite a bit more in the director's office. And the question is, this morning in the hearing, I think we made it quite clear to them that in deciding what amounts of the public's money to appropriate to the Department of Revenue for whatever purposes they're carrying out, whether it's something we know about or not, we need to know what it is. And from my perspective, they are at zero. Their budget is now zeroed out. And it is incumbent on them to come before the elected officials who are directly responsible to voters and citizens of the state and explain what they're doing in every single line of that budget. Because the interesting thing is there's a lot of discussion today about the contract they entered into with that company called Morpho Trust to provide these services, yet none of us on the committee who have been on the committee for years ever recall seeing that in the budget. And so, for example, they're not going to get any money in any of those lines until we now pin them down on what all this money is going to.
Wow. And this is just, well, it's scary too to think because there was no announcement of this. It was all very, very quiet. And
well, I tell you what, it's really interesting what came out of the hearing today, because normally on things like this, we have a state law that requires agencies to promulgate a state rule when they have a policy change. And then there's all kinds of notice and comment that has to go out to the public, and they can attend hearings. And that's our normal process. So we did ask them today why they didn't promulgate a rule on this. In fact, they have an old rule still in the books that is, the opposite of what they're doing now. And they didn't update it. They didn't promulgate a rule. And their answer to us was, well, promulgating a rule like that actually takes some effort and is kind of a hassle. So they decided not to do it.
Wow. Just wow. Well, I'm so glad that you are out there on the front lines of this, keeping track and also sounding the alarm, because, who knows how long who knows what would have happened. So is this last quick question I have for you? Are they now prevented from right now collecting information? I know that there was a temporary restraining order issued. Is that still in effect? What do we know?
It's not, and they're not prevented from doing this. And the interesting thing is, about 3 weeks ago or so, when we first found this out, and we had the director of revenue come in, and it was Senator Nieves from Franklin County, who asked the director and said, you clearly can see we don't like this. You didn't tell the public about it. Can you stop this today and stop doing this until we can get to the bottom of what's going on? And he said, yes, I can stop it, but he won't. And so they could stop it, but they won't. The only thing we can do really is take away their funding, but that funding doesn't kick in until the fiscal year that starts July 1st.
Right.
So, a complete disregard for citizens of the state of Missouri for their privacy rights, their due process rights, and for the legislature in appropriating the public's money.
Wow. Well, we so appreciate your efforts on this, and I know as soon as there are any developments, we will we'll check in with you on this program. And
well, hey, Dana, one
yes.
thing we are going to do, because this is such an important issue, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to schedule some committee meetings around the state to get the public in. And if revenue wasn't going to involve the public in this decision-making process, we're going to have those hearings around the state in the next few weeks and involve the public.
Wonderful. Please let us know when and where those will be, and we'll make sure that we make folks aware of those.
I will do that.
Fantastic. Missouri State Senator Kurt Schaefer, thank you so much, sir. We appreciate your time and effort on this. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Dana.
Take care.